Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life.
Today, we were taking a really necessary, and I have to say, a highly charged deep dive into this massive controversy around Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. And this isn't just about politics. It's about military orders, the laws of war, and really some fundamental questions of accountability.
That's exactly right. Our sources are laying out a deeply disturbing narrative here. It all stems from these U.S. military operations targeting alleged drug vessels near Venezuela. And the core conflict, it involves a highly lethal strike in the Caribbean back in September. And, these allegations that followed about a very specific verbal directive.
Right. So the mission for this deep dive is clear for us. We need to quickly and thoroughly grasp just how multifaceted this event is. We're going to be unpacking a direct clash of narratives.
You mean the White House versus Congress?
Exactly. White House denials versus congressional outrage. And then we have to dissect the serious legal issues this all raises about the laws of war and ultimately the power of the presidency.
It's such a complex picture. You've got military conduct, humanitarian law, and some really intense political maneuvering all mixed together. So I think we need to start by grounding ourselves in the facts, as the sources reported them.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to begin with the incident itself. A September 2 strike on a suspected Venezuelan drug boat. This was happening in the Caribbean near the Eastern Pacific.
Right.
And these operations, the Secretary has been very clear about this, are lethal kinetic strikes.
And that phrase, kinetic strikes, that's really important because it means using deadly force.
Yeah.
The goal is to destroy the target, not just, stop it or disable it.
So it sets the tone immediately.
It absolutely sets the tone for the entire operation. But the controversy, it didn't explode over the first strike on the boat, but what allegedly happened next.
Which is the central, and I mean the most explosive, allegation. It was detailed by the Washington Post.
Right, from the Post.
And they cited an anonymous source saying that Hegseth gave a verbal directive to military personnel to, and I'm quoting here, kill everybody aboard that vessel.
Exactly. And, giving a verbal directive is one thing.
Sure.
But the alleged consequence of that order is where the legal scrutiny just went through the roof.
Because it supposedly led to a follow-up attack.
A second strike. That's what some reports called it. It was targeting 2 individuals. The Intercept specifically reported that these 2 people were survivors of the initial attack. They were just, clinging to the wreckage.
In the water.
In the water. And that is the moment we move from a kinetic strike on a hostile vessel to, the potential targeting of incapacitated people.
So what was the response from the White House and the Pentagon? I mean, they didn't deny the operation happened?
No, not at all. They denied the specific intent regarding the survivors. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt was very, very careful with her language.
How so?
She confirmed Hegseth authorized Admiral Frank Bradley to conduct these kinetic strikes, but then she insisted that Bradley worked well within his authority and the law. The idea being that the engagement was to ensure the boat was destroyed.
So the defense is basically the order was to destroy the vessel, and anything that happened after that was part of that lawful process.
Right. Not a deliberate targeting of survivors. That's their line.
It seems like their stance is that the intent deterrence kind of overrides the specific conduct of the strike itself, and that Hegseth never used those damning words.
Oh, he denies it vehemently. Hegseth himself, he called the report fabricated, inflammatory, and derogatory. But, and this is key, while denying that order, he went out of his way to affirm the lethal nature of the operation.
He doubled down.
Completely. He confirmed they are intended to be lethal kinetic strikes. It suggests a real philosophy of zero tolerance here.
And he also very aggressively backed his chain of command. He called Admiral Bradley an American hero, a true professional.
Right, making sure there was no daylight between him and the officer who carried out the order. And that support was instantly reinforced from the very top. President Trump came out and defended Hegseth.
What did he say?
He said he did not say that, and I believe him 100%. He did add this sort of brief caveat, acknowledging he wouldn't have wanted a second strike if there were 2 people around, but then he immediately went right back to repeating Hegseth's denial.
So the takeaway from this whole first part is just defiance.
Yeah.
Hegseth doubling down on the entire mission, saying the military has only just begun sinking narco-terrorists to the bottom of the ocean.
And his reasoning was deterrence has to matter, not arrest and handover. That philosophy, it just sets the stage perfectly for the massive legal fight we need to get into next.
Okay, so if these allegations are true, if they really did target survivors, The legal implications are they're massive.
This isn't some gray area of the law. This goes right to the heart of the laws of war, which, the U.S. is obligated to uphold.
Let's talk about that legal heart. This is where the Defense Department's own law of war manual becomes so important. The sources highlight that the manual actually uses shooting shipwreck survivors as the textbook example of an illegal order, an order that service members are obligated to refuse.
And that obligation exists for a reason. It's because the protection of incapacitated people is a bedrock principle of international law going back, way back to the Hague Conventions, the Geneva Protocols. The manual says it explicitly.
What's the wording?
That those incapacitated by wounds, sickness, or shipwreck are in a helpless state, and it would be dishonorable and inhumane to make them the object of attack.
So this raises a really important question then. Who enforces that in the moment? Is the military chain of command truly designed to self-police an alleged order coming directly from the Secretary of Defense?
Well, that is the central tension, isn't it? Service members are trained that they have to refuse an illegal order, even if it comes from the highest official in the Pentagon. But the pressure, the political and professional pressure in a scenario like that would be immense.
Just the existence of the allegation puts everyone in that chain of command under a microscope.
Which is exactly why Senator Tim Kaine came out and said that if the allegations about the follow-up strike are true, the incident rises to the level of a war crime. And that's a term you just do not use lightly in Washington.
And we have to remember, the legal worries don't just stop at the alleged second strike. Lawmakers are sounding the alarm about the legality of the entire operation.
The whole thing.
Yeah. Representative Mike Turner, for instance. And you have to remember, he's a former chair of the House Intelligence Committee, so his words carry weight. He cited very serious concerns about the justification for these strikes in general.
And if you zoom out, you can see why. Legal experts are questioning the justification for a couple of key reasons. First, Congress hasn't authorized these specific operations. There's no declaration of war, no use of forced resolution.
And second,
the vessels, they're carrying drugs, but they generally don't pose an imminent threat to the U.S. homeland that would require, immediate lethal military force.
So the administration is kind of stretching the definition of a valid military target here. And when you think about the scale, reports say these strikes have killed more than 80 people since early September.
It's a huge number.
With questionable legal authorization, it's just a highly volatile situation.
It is. And the contrast between how serious these legal warnings are and the tone from the Secretary of Defense himself is, well, it's jarring.
You're talking about the social media post.
I am. After lawmakers started raising these concerns, Hegseth's response was just a moment of pure political theater. He shared an image of, you're not going to believe this, Franklin the Turtle.
The children's cartoon character.
Yes. Franklin the Turtle firing a weapon at drug-smuggling boats. And the caption was, "For your Christmas wish list."
That is an astonishing detail.
It suggests a complete disregard for the gravity of the legal allegations. What kind of signal does that send to the service members who are supposed to be taking the law of war manual seriously?
It sends a signal of political protection.
Oh.
And that image, it immediately lit a fire under some lawmakers who felt the only response was to go for the highest form of accountability, impeachment.
So the political reaction was swift, led by this push for impeachment. Representative Sri Thanadar from Michigan, he announced he was considering introducing articles of impeachment.
And his language was strong. He called Hegseth utterly incompetent, totally reckless, and a serious threat to U.S. national security.
That push, though, it really needs some context. Thanadar is known in D.C. as a bit of an anomaly among Democrats. He has this history of pushing what are called rogue impeachment efforts.
Right, like the one against President Trump that he later pulled back.
Exactly. So this was a lone wolf effort. It wasn't some unified party strategy.
And Democratic leadership was very quick to make that clear. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries basically said the effort was dead on arrival.
And his reasoning wasn't about whether Hegseth was innocent or not. It was pure political calculus.
Right. He said Republicans control the House and they will never allow it to proceed. He said Donald Trump will order them not to do it.
So by shooting down the impeachment idea, Jeffries was probably trying to avoid a distracting and, frankly, doomed political fight. He wanted to redirect that energy somewhere else.
And while he rejected the process, he certainly didn't hold back his criticism. He accused the White House of lying and called Hegseth the most unqualified Secretary of Defense in American history.
So the opposition is fierce, for sure, but the weapon of choice isn't impeachment.
So what is it?
It's congressional oversight. That's the consensus alternative. The Armed Services Committees as the real path forward.
And that's where the actual work will likely happen. Bipartisan leaders in both the House and Senate Armed Services Committees have publicly promised vigorous oversight to get to the bottom of what happened.
It's a mechanism for fact-finding that avoids the political circus of an impeachment that, was never going to succeed in this environment.
Which leads us directly to the final and maybe the most profound layer of concern here. The ultimate check on power, the presidential pardon. One opinion source we looked at suggests that Secretary Hegseth has no reason to be worried, even if the absolute worst allegations were proven true.
And the reason they're so confident in that prediction really speaks to this perceived erosion of legal checks and balances once the pardon power gets involved.
It's a perspective built on precedent, right?
Yeah.
The argument is that President Trump has shown such a radical willingness to use the pardon power to protect his allies.
It effectively grants them what the source calls a license for administrative lawlessness.
And that is the core legal fear. It's about the incentive structure. The hypothetical scenario is, well, it's terrifying. You have officials who feel incentivized to rampantly violate the rule of law for the president.
Knowing that the promise of a pardon is there. It's a shield against any personal legal consequences, whether it's a war crimes investigation or, simple misconduct charges.
And the source pointed to specific examples to back this up.
They did. They cited past controversial pardons for January 6 rioters, the pardon of the Binance founder, Changpeng Zhao, to argue that the power has already been repurposed. It's being used to reward loyalty, not to correct judicial errors.
Which fundamentally challenges the whole constitutional design. I mean, the sources argue that the Founding Fathers assumed impeachment would be the check on an abusive pardon power.
Exactly. The idea was if a president pardoned an official who committed a clear crime, let's say a war crime Congress, was expected to immediately impeach that president for abusing the power and undermining the rule of law.
But in today's hyper-partisan landscape, where one party controls one chamber and operates under the president's direction, that mechanism is seen as fundamentally broken.
Why would you pursue impeachment for an abusive pardon if you already know the outcome is predetermined by partisan loyalty?
The check has failed because political loyalty has overridden constitutional duty. And that vacuum of accountability is what creates this license for lawlessness.
Which leads to the most extreme suggestion from the opinion source. It really shows you the level of concern out there. The source concludes that if Congress can't be trusted to police these abuses, then maybe the pardon power itself should be amended or just eliminated through a constitutional amendment.
A truly radical idea.
It's an intellectual argument, for sure, but it highlights just how unchecked this power is perceived to be right now.
What a deep dive this has been. So we started with a lethal military strike near Venezuela, which led to allegations that could rise to the level of a war crime.
Then we moved through a political battle over impeachment that seems, destined to fail.
And we found that the only real oversight left is this bipartisan congressional investigation. And all of it just shadowed by the question of whether a presidential pardon could just wipe away any legal consequences in the end.
Indeed. And despite all this intense political and legal heat, this controversy doesn't seem to be slowing down the administration's aggressive posture at all. The sources signaled the squeeze on Venezuela will continue to tighten.
How so?
They've signaled plans for potential land operations very soon, and there's a broad directive closing the airspace above and around the country. The policy is just plowing ahead, regardless of all this.
So as you, listening, reflect on all this, here's a provocative question for you. We have this tension between the administration's goal of deterrence through lethal strikes and the constraints of international law. If the legality of the entire operation is being questioned, and high-level officials face almost no accountability because of political deadlock and the pardon power,
Right.
What does that tension mean for future U.S. military actions in any area this administration defines as a narco-terrorist battleground?
Something profound to mull over.
Until our next deep dive.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next episode on While We Were Distracted.